if you want to post it in the chat, please do that. I've got the chat up so I can manage to keep track of things while we're going on. But really want to know what's on your mind, things you'd like to know about. I've got plenty of things we can talk about here today. Fred, I got 3 hours, right? Only 2 hours. Okay. All right. Just kidding. Just kidding. I like to think of myself, I used to joke about as a faculty member that I could, if you need something in 5 minutes, I can give you something in 5 minutes, not take a half an hour to try to say that. So, okay, let's see here. Just a quick reminder, again, what the hubs are, and as an intro here, I'll just get a reminder of what the hubs are. We'll talk about some current conditions, where we are right now, and a few things related to that. Then we'll talk about some random kind of issues that have come up, and then look ahead. Unfortunately, we timed this just wrong, and that the new climate outlooks that are released every month will be released tomorrow. They'll come out tomorrow. So I'll talk what I can now, but we'll also talk about where you can find some more information about this tomorrow. Excuse me. Just a quick reminder of who we are. We are part of USDA. There are 10 hubs that work nationally. 5 are in the part of the USDA called the Ag Research Service, ARS, which is where we sit. 5 sit in the Forest Service, and we work on weather, climate issues, and agriculture across the country on a regional basis to try to deal with regional topics. We cover the 8-state region that is most of the Corn Belt, Minnesota, Missouri, over to Michigan and Ohio. And then we do expand some of our work out into the plains to deal with some of the row crop issues out in that area. So let's just jump through these things. We don't need to touch on those too much unless you want to know more about the hubs. Just, I guess the quick background is that we do try to work across the breadth of agriculture. We sometimes get a focus in Iowa that corn and beans are the only things in agriculture, and they are a big player. But we deal with livestock, we deal with specialty crops, because in some areas of the Midwest, those are a bigger issue than row crops are, and they have a different set of issues than the row crop issues do. So some of the things in the way of climate that are impacting them affect them differently. Apple growers, wine grape growers are dealing with the variable spring issues much differently than row crop folks are, because when perennials are ready to break dormancy, there's not much you can do to stop them. At least from a row crop standpoint, we can wait to plant. Alfalfa, from a dairy standpoint, that's another issue that we're having. Doesn't get as damaged by spring freezes, but can be damaged as some of the other fruits are. So yeah, if you have any other questions about other crops, we'll be happy to deal with those also. Okay, we're going to jump into kind of where we are at this point to kind of review our current conditions. I'm going to give you a couple things on the way of precipitation, where we are right now, at a couple time scales, just to kind of give you a perspective on what's happened. Okay, these first 2 graphics are this one and the next one. We're talking about precipitation. The upper left-hand side is total precipitation. On the lower right-hand side is percent of normal, percent of average. And the scales on these are all the same. The darker red, the darker brown you are, the less precipitation or less compared to average. The areas that are in green to blue to purple are more than average. So in the upper left-hand side, not a lot of precipitation, but we don't expect much at this time of year. And we're talking about, when we talk about precipitation, we're talking about liquid. So if there's snow, it's melted down liquid. But on the right-hand side gives you a little perspective compared to average. Up in northern Minnesota, North Dakota, last 30 days have been relatively wet. Kind of down along the Ohio Valley has also been wet. The storm track has been fairly active down in that area. A few pockets of wetness in between them, but also a lot of dryness, especially out in the plains area. Some across southern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan have been relatively dry. Now, dry this time of year is not a major issue unless you like snow. We're going to talk snow here in just a little bit too, but it is part of over the overall water issue. Now, If we went back 90 days, this would look different because in October, we had some decent rainfalls that helped us recover some of our moisture deficits from the year. But I didn't include that. I will go back to the last 6 months now. Okay, this is a total for the last 6 months since the middle of July. So again, upper left-hand side is total precipitation, lower right-hand side is percent of normal, percent of average. And you still see that dry area in the plains and a little bit different area, Missouri, Illinois, again, southern Wisconsin. It's been dry. Some wetter areas up in the Dakotas and northern Minnesota. And if you listen to the news last year, that might seem kind of odd to you, is why we're above average, but we heard a lot about drought up there. The drought was very bad winter, early spring. So that's why the problems we've had up in that area. Some of the small grains that are grown in that area, some of the durum wheats, the spring wheats, and barley all had very bad years last year. In fact, I think, was it durum wheat or spring wheat? Worst yielding in over 30 years. If I'm trying to remember the other numbers from USDA. The other problem you had is when you have a spring drought is this is an area that is cool season grasses. So when you get hammered in the springtime, they don't recover. And that's the situation we've had up there. Fred and I were talking about coming in. North Dakota and Montana, I believe, some of the worst forage availability in recent history because, one, there was not much grown, and two, people trying to grab whatever they can, trying to get livestock through this situation. And so that's presented a really serious problem for them in that area, and wondering if we're not, well, one, there have been sell-offs, continue to be sell-offs, even midwinter sell-offs, for people, not expecting to have enough forage, wondering if there may be some relocation of some livestock to deal with those forage issues. Now, the other thing to point out, this overall wetter than average area to our east, we're going to talk about that more as we go along, in the way of La Nina and in the way of from a corn belt standing overall. Okay, soil moisture. This is a graphic, and I included all the links to this in all of these. If you want them, you can take pictures of them and grab them if you want to, or you can contact me afterwards and say, hey, can I have the slides? Almost all the slides are public slides or from public websites. So you can grab the information and have a look at it yourself. Okay, so this is a relatively new product from NASA that combines some satellite observations with some modeling to try to assess what's going on in the soils. We need to have a more widespread soil moisture monitoring network. We're getting some progress on that, but still have a ways to go. So just to kind of give you what we're looking at here, this is a national product, and this is all based on percentiles. Basically, the 0 or the brown area would be driest on record. If you were up in the blue, it would be wettest on record. So same as we've been before. Greens to blues are wet, yellows to reds and browns are dry. So kind of looking around our area, it shows much of Iowa still on the dry side, and that southern Wisconsin area on the dry side, which we've been talking about as being below average. We'll talk about the drought monitor here in a little bit. Some of the eastern corn belt, it shows wetter down towards Kentucky, and then a little bit near average to drier further north. I think the model is overdoing the dryness in that area a little bit. I think from what I'm hearing, it's still overall pretty wet in much of the eastern part of the corn belt. And then if you go look up in the Dakotas, I mentioned where it was wetter than average, it is still wetter than average, and that's going to be a problem carrying on into the spring for them also, because they just can't dry out over winter very much up in that area. And then Nebraska and further south in the plains, been very dry recently. It's going to continue to dry out. We'll show that in the drought monitor here again as we go along. So anyone looking at winter wheat in this area, I think we're going to have some winter wheat problems as we're going along here. Okay, other part of moisture where we are right now, where we are in the way of snow. This again is a product, another NOAA product. combination of satellite surface measurements and some other things. And what's plotted here is the amount of snow depth. So that the kind of tealish color, the pale blue color is in the 4 to 8. You get darker blue colors further north, deeper snow totals up in that area. So again, some things to point out. Far north, they have decent snow cover, North Dakota, Minnesota, on top of some wetness already. So that will be that'll be something to watch up in that area for any flooding issues. From South Dakota south, really no snow cover. That area mentions being dry, really no snow in that area, even catches part of northwest Iowa. If you get into Minnesota, Iowa, and parts of Wisconsin, decent snow cover. This last, basically based on this last system, and that snow is going to stay with us as we're going to have some fairly cold temperatures over the next 2 or 3 weeks that will keep the situation going there. And then an interesting area in the Eastern Corn Belt where really even some of these lake effect snow areas in northern Indiana have not had much in the way of snowfall. It's really, really quite interesting what we've seen. Now, from a soil moisture standpoint, we tend not to think about snow as something that improves our soil moisture. A little bit might get in, but it's unlikely to have much overall effect. Basically, this will lead to runoff as we get into the melting in a few weeks. Okay, I should have changed this graphic, but it kind of gives you, I stole it from a talk I used earlier. I came from another talk right ahead here to kind of do a review of temperatures. We reviewed where we are in the way of moisture. Now we're going to do a little review of temperatures the latter part of the growing season until currently. There's a lot packed into this graphic, but there's a lot of good stuff really here. So we'll walk you through. Well, what we're showing you here on the bottom is the x-axis is dates since October 1st. So October 1st on the left-hand side over till the present on the right-hand side here. Temperatures are plotted on the left, temperatures in degrees Fahrenheit, and on the right is temperatures degrees Celsius. Okay. The tan band through the middle, the top of that tan band is the average high for each day. The bottom of that tan band is the average low for each day. So just one thing to point out is we are right now at about the bottom climatologically. At this point, we start working our way upward. Our days have started getting longer back in December. Climatology works a little bit differently. This is the average coldest time. We start working our way out after this. Okay. So then the blue lines for each day are where the high and low were each day. The top of the bar was the high for each day. The bottom of the blue bar was the low for each day. So pointing out a couple things kind of from an ag situation. Overall, we had warmer conditions back in September and October, which was good, helped to dry for harvest, and helped to, get that activity done. Downside was the soil temperatures also reflected the warm temperatures. We had very warm soil temperatures, and heard reports from extension people that we had people putting manure out or fall applying nitrogen because they were done harvesting early, but they were doing this when the soil temperatures were very warm. So that was a real problem because one, you're losing the nutrient value because it was too warm. And then, that nitrogen is going to end up going someplace else and unfortunately adds to other off-site issues. So that was something that happened. We had a little bit of cold and then we got back in November and much of December was again warm, which was nice. It's from a human standpoint. If you got to be out doing field activity, it's nice. The downside again is overall warm temperatures are not good for soils. We like soils to freeze. We also like to have some cold temperatures to kind of knock back some of the insects on some of these issues. So we finally have had some of that cold and some did come before we had snow. Because now that we have snow, that helps to insulate some of the surface and can protect some of the insects overall. We got cold, a little bit of recovery again, and now we're going to stay more on the cold side, it looks like, for the next several weeks overall. Okay. Soil temperatures. Okay, I should pause. Does anybody have any questions at this point or other comments they want to make? Also gives me a chance to drink water.
If you just go ahead and unmute, you'll be able to ask questions directly.
And I have 4 kids. I'm used to complaints too. I'm happy to handle those. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and keep rolling on here then. Here's where we are in the way of soil temperatures, 4-inch soil temperatures across the state. There's a county average for each location. There are some estimates, and then the actual measured 4-inch soil temperatures are in the red. So nearly the whole state is at freezing or below, a little bit above in the southeastern part of the state. I would not expect these to shift too much in the near future, except for the places where we have more exposed soils with snow cover over most of the state. It helps to insulate the soils. And even though we have cold temperatures, it doesn't penetrate too much. And in fact, in some cases, you can get the reverse to happen. You can insulate the soils enough to actually warm, because warmer temperatures from below are actually able to warm our surface soils. So that's kind of where we are with that. Okay, touched on drought a little bit ago. Now we'll dive a bit more into this. Just a reminder of when we're talking about drought, we're assigning this based on the US Drought Monitor, which is the map in the upper left-hand side here. The map in the lower right-hand side is a zoomed in north central states or the Corn Belt, essentially. You can zoom down even into Iowa if you want to. The categories here are white. If there's white, there's no drought issues. So I mentioned in the eastern Corn Belt that there was, that there was a little dryness showing up in the models, but it didn't seem like that was real, and that really is the case. There is no drought in the eastern part of the Corn Belt until you get to northern Illinois. We still have some over parts of Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, some developing and lingering dryness from the year. And then you go further to the west, and lots of drought issues out in that area, ongoing. The northern plains dryness is a carry-on. Southern plains has been carrying over, but worsening with La
Dennis,
Nina. Yes.
I believe Dustin has his hand raised.
Sorry, I missed that. Dustin, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, it's on this, and so this was all good. I guess my main thing was about the kind of far west. The NASA chart you showed earlier, kind of on projecting soil moisture, didn't seem to show it as dry out there. And I think it's gotten some better, but I guess is it the drought really continuing out there, or is there some hope that it might kind of lessen in some of the far, I'm thinking the far kind of California and then Wisconsin, Oregon.
Sure.
And I know that you're the Midwest Climate Hub.
Yeah. Nope. No.
On this one, it looked like I was surprised that it looked this good compared to in kind of Texas.
Yep. No, it's a good question, Dustin. The thing you have to remember is this is a model, and it's trying to assess water condition in the western U.S. We don't have great soils, so you're kind of comparing something different in that area. This is the overall wet time of year. And we have had some decent snowfalls throughout much of the western US. I didn't include the snowfall estimates for what's going on. We have had some very large snowfalls in the sea areas and in the Cascades. If you've taken note of those, there have been some very, very large events there that have helped improve the situation. Let's go ahead and go back to the Drought Monitor. Now, that seems in contrast with what we're showing on the Drought Monitor, but the Drought Monitor uses a larger number of different indicators. It uses things like, nearer term precipitation and longer term precipitation. We have some longer term precipitation deficits in the western US that are still driving ongoing issues with the Drought Monitor. We include things like soil moisture, we include things like water supply. There's a number of different features that come into play here. So while the near term we've had some improvement, we still have some very long-term water issues, like California, for example. They really not, after those first few storms, there's not a whole lot more has gone on since then. So they need some more snow on top of this to help them start to recover from the situation. The other problem that California has is to try to get through this. They started going into their groundwater supplies and started sucking water out of aquifers to try to get their crops through. Well, that's a short-term fix causing longer term issues because those aquifers don't recharge nearly as quickly. So they've really put themselves behind the 8 ball. And the standard answer I jokingly give is, if you can figure out how to grow something here that they grow in California, it may be something you try to do, because they are going through reevaluations of what they're growing. Used to grow a lot of almonds, and they still do, but they started ripping some almond trees out because they are such intensive water users. And there are a lot of other, food crops that are grown there because you can grow them in a wider part of the year, that you may, other things may get moved to other places just because of the longer term water issues that are going on there.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. No, it's a common problem. If you look at one map and compare it to the drought monitor, you say, wait a minute, these things don't line up. But there are a lot of indicators, and it's really hard to assess drought in the Western US because there are so many different things that come into play, and especially, snow, needing to have snow in Colorado so that Arizona can have water, those kinds of things all come into play with it. So, no, good question there. Yeah, quick reminder that, there's an author each week that draws this map. They take a lot of these different sets of data into account, and there are people from across the country. I think it's over 500 people regionally that can give input to the author to say, here's what we're seeing around, here's what we think, and then there's a negotiation between those two as to what this looks like. I'm one, as well as Justin Glisson, our state climatologist, are two of the people who can give input to the Drought Monitor author on a weekly basis. Also took another look at this from the Iowa standpoint, and this shows a time trend of what's happened in the way of drought since the beginning of the Drought Monitor. The Drought Monitor came into play, was first developed in '99, so really got going in about 2000. So this shows you from 2000 until the present coverage of the Drought Monitor in the state of Iowa and the categories. So the yellow is the abnormally dry, and then the different colors are the different categories of drought. And from a length standpoint and a seriousness standpoint, this is the worst drought we've had since the 2012-13, and one of the worst we've had in the last 20 years. That it's just persisting, it's ongoing, and we've had some periods of recovery, and it's not been awful, but it's not been great either in this whole situation. So just to kind of give you some perspective on that overall. And again, the Drought Monitor page, you can go and make one of these yourselves. You can even go down to, I think you can go down to a county level. They get this down to a county level. Okay. Completely shifting directions now. This has come up several times, so I wanted to comment on this. If you do social media at all, you've probably seen this or seen this on the news, the volcano in Tonga, which has been very well covered, and lots of things come out about it. About how big it was. It was a very large volcano, but was it big enough to cause global issues? And what happens? There are a few volcanoes that are large enough. The most recent one in memory was 1991, Pinatubo in Indonesia, one back in '85 in Mexico. I can't remember the name of that one, El Chichon, I think. And then there were a couple. There was one in the 1880s and one in the 18 teens that were large enough that they were able to put enough sulfur dioxide high enough in the atmosphere that they actually reflects incoming solar radiation and cools the globe for a year or two afterwards. The one in the 18 teens led to a couple of years of winter where they didn't have a growing season in parts of Northern Europe or the US at that point. So that was the question. What the early numbers that have come out of this is, it's despite how big it still was small compared to these other ones. So it has a serious regional impact, but it doesn't appear to have a global impact. And in fact, if you've been watching social media, or maybe it's because I hang around with the right geeky people, they've been able to track the shock waves in air pressure around the globe. And in fact, Sunday afterwards One shock wave passed west to east. Later in the day, Sunday, there was one went east to west, where it had gone all the way around the globe and had come back and was crossing. And I think on Monday, they'd even picked up a secondary one where it had gone around again. It just how impressive this explosion was. But at this point, it doesn't look to have an overall global impact. Completely different topic again. We start thinking from a perennial standpoint on spring leaf out. Even though we're in the middle of January at this point, we're starting to see spring leaf out in the southern US. This is a graphic from the National Phenological Network, a good partner of ours from the Climate Hubs, that they work on phenology issues. So we're starting to see spring leaf out occurring across the southern US. That is 8 days early, a little bit early. This was something we were very seriously concerned about at this point in our region, because we were so warm. The cold now is probably going to help us out and slow things down. The cold is probably going to hit, that's coming, is probably going to hit the southeast fairly hard. So it may ding some things down there that really have not frozen. Oddly enough, up until a couple weeks ago, I have an extension colleague in southern Indiana. Their cover crops had not frozen yet as of about the third week of December. It's probably gotten cold enough now that it has, but they had not frozen by that point because it hadn't been that cold. Okay, how are we doing on time here? Okay, just a couple things we're going to touch on here, and something from an overall perspective in the way of precipitation and dryness. Hang on just a second here. I've shown this graphic before talking about longer term changes in the way of precipitation. And this is a graphic from the last National Climate Assessment showing what's happened in the way of precipitation since the beginning of the 20th century. So 120 plus years, 120-ish years of data we're dealing with here. And basically the whole US has increased in the way of precipitation. Nearly the whole US has increased in precipitation during that time period. The darker green areas are the bigger increases in precipitation, greater than 15%. Decreases in precipitation are in brown. The darkest brown has seen 15% decreases. Getting back to Dustin's question, this is again that serious concern about California, because despite the some recent precipitation, overall parts of California, Nevada, Arizona are seeing decreases in precipitation. And if we start doing the math, that's an area where we've seen a lot more relocation of people because it's more pleasant climate-wise to live, but people require water. So you have people moving into an area, they're going to use water where water is limited already, and it's getting drier. And these are areas where there is agricultural production. Even Arizona, there are greens that are grown in Arizona and shipped. There are benefits to growing in a desert because there actually are reduced disease issues as long as you have water. So this is an ongoing issue we're going to continue to have. Okay, transitioning, trying to get back on topic here. One of the issues that we have seen more recently when you talk to producers about precipitation, bigger rainfalls happening at tougher times of year, especially like spring. And that shows up here. Spring precipitation, and spring here is called March, April, May, is overall getting wetter. And that's a problem for us trying to get into the field. Now, I'm going to try to jump to a different connection here. I'm going to go, I can show a couple different places here. We got Ames and Lamar's and Webster City for a comparison. Now, what I'm talking about here, this is a graphic showing you what we consider our normals, our 30-year climate normals. When we compare to averages, that we use 30-year averages, and these were just updated this last year because we're looking at the time period 1991 to 2020. That 30-year period is what we compare to. When we talk about climate changes, we talk about longer-term data sets, and there's a different way we do that. But when we talk about comparing to average highs or average lows, this is what we have right now. And there was a change in these when these came out compared to the previous 30-year averages that kind of shook me up a little bit. I'm going to talk to you about that now. Okay, what's on this graphic is months, okay? January to December across the bottom. The lines are the average temperatures for each month. The red line on the top is the average high for each month. The blue line is the average low, average all the days in the month for those 30 years. And the brown is the average of those two. And then the green, and then that's plotted on the right-hand side in temperature. On the left-hand side is precipitation, and the green bars show average precipitation for that month. Okay, so that you see here, June is up about 5.5 inches of precipitation average in Webster City. See this falls off into December, and January is our driest month. Here average less than an inch precipitation in Webster City. Okay, now what I want to contrast with you, I talked about wetting springs and a more common thing that we're seeing in the wetting springs, but one of the reasons why agriculture is so productive throughout Iowa and a chunk of the Midwest is, one, we have good soils, but two, we get rainfall throughout all the summer. Average rainfall throughout the summer stays there. That time period, especially for corn or beans, July and August are the time when corn and beans need more of their water, and they need to have water available. So sometimes in the soils, but it's better if we have precipitation. And that's Midwest precipitation, still tends to occur around June and around July and August, even though it falls off some. Well, in these last 30-year average, that has changed. Okay, here's one for Webster City. We still have that wetter spring into June, but then there's this fall off into July, and then we get a little recovery in August. Okay, let's look at Lamar's. And there's even a bigger fall off that showed up in Northwest Iowa, parts of Minnesota, South Dakota. The average June precipitation in Lamar's is about 4.5 inches. Drops off to near 3 in July. If we go to Ames falls off a little bit, but it's not too bad. Mount Pleasant is a little bit different. July falls off some, but it actually falls off worse into August. So this has me concerned because this is getting kind of backward from the way we want agricultural production to be, being wetter early in the season and then dry later on. This is something that the climate models have been projecting, and it may be starting to show up. And it's an overall concern to me. We can talk more about this another time, but something I took note of and wanted to share with people. We need to do some more work around issues related to this. Okay, I'll pause here again. Are there any questions anyone has I want to check more on? Next thing we're going to do is talk about outlooks at this point, seeing what we can see going ahead.
Sorry, can I begin? I mean, do you have that compared then to like the previous 30 years? I mean, so it's dropped off more in the kind of July time frame in the study? Is that what you're saying then, like what it would have been the previous 30 years?
Right. I should have thrown those in, and I don't know if I have those handy. Like Lamar,
I just make sure I understood that right.
Yeah. So what you would have seen in the previous 30 years is, these would have all been the same, but July would have been up, around that 4-inch time frame or 4-inch amount, so that you would have seen a little bit of a fall off from June, but not as much as you have now. So that it's that big drop off in July precipitation or midsummer precipitation that is showing up. That makes sense, Dustin?
Yep, thanks. I just make sure I understand that right.
Yep, that's it.
And any other questions? If not, I've got a question. Our climate specialist down at the local coffee shop, they were telling me that, it's getting windier out here, that they don't remember the winds that we're having, not just today, but as a rule in this part of Iowa. Is there any validity to that?
The data we have for wind is a little tougher to come by. We haven't measured wind data as well and as consistently as we have temperature and precipitation. So we don't have quite the same records on those. I have a feeling that may be influenced by a couple extreme events, you know, the derecho last year, the derechos in December, and some other strong wind events this year. Um, right now, I don't think we have good indications that there's overall changes in wind. There have just been some larger wind events that have really caused some widespread problems, is the issue that we're dealing with. It's something that you know, that question keeps coming up periodically, about, you know, that's one we haven't talked enough about is wind. We talked, there's some things about humidity that I don't have the graphic, and some other things, but wind we haven't addressed well enough overall. So good question, Fred. Anyone else? I like intimate groups sometimes because people are more willing to get into conversations. So, okay, let's go ahead and jump into the outlook parts here. Okay, what we do with climate outlooks is there are a number of things that we can use. Unfortunately, we can't tell you, you know, several months from now exactly what's going to happen. Well, the sun's going to come up a few months from now. It's going to be warmer than now a few months from now. You know, there's not a lot that's not that much useful, and doesn't tell you an awful lot. So there are some things that we can use, and we talk about those. There are some things that aren't useful at all. You know, basically the things we use when we're dealing with climate outlooks: one, current conditions. It's not an outlook, but you always need to know where you are to know which way we're headed, and to see if that's a potential problem. You know, if you're wet already going into the start of the growing season, and you know, if the outlooks lean towards the wet side, that's a problem. If you're dry and the outlooks lean toward the wet side, that's much less of a problem. So that's why we always address what's going on current, and you should always be aware of what's happening locally. Always talk about El Nino, La Nina status, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. There are other oscillations that do affect us. Sometimes those oscillations aren't always forecastable. And I probably shouldn't even mention them if they're not forecastable. Trends, definitely trends are something we can watch because they can give us hints to some different things. And then computer models are always can have some value, but you can't just read a computer model and say it's going to do this, because the models don't always agree. So you always want to try to look and interpret what the models say to deal with that. That's what the forecasters do when they're talking about snowfall events, is, you know, what do the different models say, and compare those. We do the same thing with climate models also. Okay, the first, El Nino, La Nina. Okay, we're talking about things in the Pacific Ocean here. Oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, no, they have things in the Pacific do have an influence over us, even though we're distant from them. They're you know, that's not directly related, but we're indirectly related to some things happening there. We're talking about sea surface temperatures, one called El Nino and the other one called La Nina. They're opposite faces of the same oscillation across the Pacific. We're currently what's called the La Nina status, and we're going to persist in that status in the spring. It's unlikely to affect the summer, so I don't think it'll have too much impact on the growing season. So far this winter, we have looked very much like we would expect a La Nina winter to look. We've been wetter to the east, wetter in the northern plains, and somewhat to the north. Overall temperatures have been warmer to the south and somewhat colder to our north. So it's really been lined up very well comparatively. So yeah, La Nina is going to continue with us. So that's going to influence our outlooks into the springtime. Okay, now we're going to walk through the different outlooks. We're going to show you just a reminder of what these are. These are from the Climate Prediction Center. I've got the link on the next one. Every day they issue a 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day outlook for temperature and precipitation. There is a monthly outlook that will be updated tomorrow, and then that will be updated at the end of the month for the next month. And then there are longer range seasonal ones that are updated monthly. That will also be updated tomorrow. So we're a little bit off, unfortunately, in the days that these will be released tomorrow. But I'll tell you where you can get access to those or find out more about them in some context tomorrow. One of those is the Midwest Climate Hub website. We do what's called an ag outlook, where we take the outlooks from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center and put an ag spin on them as to what they could impacts they could have on agriculture as much as we can throughout the region. Okay. First, next 7 days, what we're looking at for the next 7 days. We have this big snowfall event. Now the storm track is going to shift to the southeast, so that the southeastern U.S. is likely to get more precipitation, maybe the northeast. The big white area over us means unlikely to get much precipitation over the next 7 days. Or if we do, it should be very light. There should not be big precipitation accumulations coming. So that's okay. The cold air is over us now, so that more of the storm track is staying to the southeast, and there's just not a lot of moisture over us to be able to produce much precipitation. If we jump ahead to the next week, this is the 8 to 14 day outlook. And the next graphics, these next few graphics, we're going to show temperature on the left-hand side, precipitation on the right-hand side. And these are all probabilities compared to average, okay? So looking through the end of the month, the blue over us and areas to our east indicate better chances of colder than average throughout the end of the month. Doesn't mean that every day is going to be below average, but overall looks like the rest of the month is going to be colder than average. The tan area leans slightly to the dry side on the right-hand side, so that this is not a very wet time of year overall, and looks like we have a lesser chance of precipitation. Now, typically, I didn't show the monthly outlook because the current monthly outlook is for January, and we're almost 2/3 of the way through January already. So there will be a new one released tomorrow. So I just jumped ahead and showing you the 90-day outlook for temperature and precipitation. So this is very much like a La Nina, what we would expect with a La Nina over us, in that the southern U.S. is more likely warmer than average. The southern U.S. is warmer already, but we're warmer compared to average. The northwestern U.S. is likely to be colder. And on the right-hand side, precipitation, so that much of the eastern Corn Belt, even eastern parts of Iowa, lean towards the wetter than average side. This is for January, February, March, okay? And then some up in the northern plains. So slightly better chance of precipitation as we're going into the spring. And then if I jump into the main part of spring, March, April, May, you see the outlooks again look very similar, because this is very much what a La Nina would look like. Okay, what does this mean from an agriculture standpoint? Looks like, the cold is likely to get here for the end of the month into part of February. It looks like we recover after that. And then overall, we may get another cold outburst or two, but not too bad overall the way it looks right now. We do look like we will get more active in the way of precipitation. For us in Iowa, that's not so bad because we're a bit dry. But as you go further east, the areas that were wetter, if you remember back to the earlier graphics I showed you, parts of Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan are wetter than average. The wetter than average conditions for the spring probably are going to cause some planting delays and problems for them. Around our area, I don't expect too much in the way of planting or spring delays, because our soils are relatively dry overall, so we can take a bit more moisture. So unless we get really, really wet, and we got the snow now. Once it does get warm, it'll probably be into February sometime. It gets warm, we'll probably start working on that snowfall at that point. Okay, kind of a summary of where we are right now then. Rest of winter. We'll know a bit more tomorrow with the outlooks. Cold through the end of January, more cold likely coming into early February. Not sure it lasts overall for the month, but again, we'll have to keep an eye on that. Right now, we don't see any more major storms. It's too early to call an end to that for the winter, but right now we just don't see any of them at this point. From a spring standpoint, our soils are somewhat dry, but our trend is wetter, and the outlooks lean to wetter, especially the eastern part of Iowa to the east. So I don't expect any spring planting issues. We might plant into a little bit of dry soils. That's okay. That's okay. I'd rather plant it a little bit dry than to a little bit wet at this point. If we look, so what that's going to lead to, I expect to see some delayed planting in the eastern Corn Belt and even parts of the Dakotas. They have some very wet soils up there and they just don't dry out over the winter. So I expect there to be some planting delays up in that area also. And in the Dakotas, that's a problem because they are season length limited from a problem. So will there be drought in the Corn Belt this summer? Yes. Just not sure where and how much. You know, we still have some carryover drought issues. We'll probably work on those this spring and ease some of that. Drought issues in the West, drought issues in the plains are probably going to stay with us because it's going to be hard to alleviate those as much as we'd like to. Okay, I mentioned where you can find out more information tomorrow when these are released. Every third Thursday of the month, and we do these throughout the year, we have an Outlook webinar where it's a talk that looks a lot like this, where we talk about current conditions, impacts, and outlooks. The presenters this month are from Michigan State University, their state climatologist, and a postdoc who works with him, both very bright guys. I'm always on these to address questions at the end on the ag side to deal with that part of it. There's a link at the top you need to go to sign up for the webinar. It's free. You just have to sign up so you get a login so we can manage who's there. If you're not able to make it, we record them and show the slides afterwards so you can have a look at those if you want to. Or I mentioned if you want to check out what we're doing, please do. Let me go ahead one more. This is the Climate Hub's website, and especially where we can get our ag outlook. I probably won't update that until after the first of the month. That I usually wait till the update then and do an update at that point. But you can check out anytime and get the most recent one there. And then that's basically all I have. This is our staff right now. You get to figure out who is who. We are increasing our numbers again. Fortunately, Lori Nowatzki is our coordinator, came over from Iowa State to join us as our coordinator. We have an NRCS liaison for a second year, fortunately, and then we'll be hiring some additional staff, and then we're waiting to see what happens from a budget standpoint. Until Congress passes a budget and see where we get at that point. There may be some increases coming, but we have to wait and see to what gets passed and on to us. If you want to follow us on social media, the Climate Hubs are at USDA Climate Hubs, or I'm at Dennis Todey. It is all a very, very official sharing that I have. We only weather, climate, ag relationships that I do. So I will pause there. What questions do you have at this point?
If you have questions, just go ahead and unmute. I just want to make everyone aware that you will be receiving a link to a evaluation, a survey, probably this afternoon. We appreciate if you will go ahead and it's only 4 questions, but answer them. That helps us create better programming. We had a great program today, but we want to continue in that vein. So any questions? Otherwise, I've got one. Dennis, you'd mentioned taking water out of the aquifer when we irrigate, and that takes a long time to recharge. In our area, what do our aquifers look like, and what is a long time? If we have a big 5-inch rain event, does that fill 5 inches in the aquifer?
Now you're trying to make me into a hydrogeologist. I can't do that, Fred. No. Okay. Each aquifer is different. Okay. There are aquifers that are, fairly constrained, and that they barely recharge or don't recharge. And so when you take water out of them, very little or none gets back in, and that's a problem from that standpoint. Other aquifers recharge up in Northwest Iowa. Those recharge fairly readily. The problem with those is they're fairly shallow, and that's a problem that the DNR and IDALs both know about. And with the increase in water use up there, it's something they're monitoring and trying to wrestle with how to deal with that, because you don't need extended drought up there to be able to cause problems. Most of the other aquifers in the state are fairly reasonable, but and I talk about when in California, I can't tell you what a long time is, but I've seen people who track this kind of thing and are familiar with California, that the water they pulled out of there will take years to recover, if not longer than that. I mean, to the point where the land, they pulled enough water out, they're seeing land settling. The land is actually dropping in some area. They pulled so much water out of it. That's the kind of thing we're dealing with. Most of our aquifers around here are better than that, and are better managed to be able to do that.
Okay, while we're waiting, if there's another question coming up, I'd like to thank Dr. Todey for presenting the information in his climate and weather outlook. We always try to do this early in the year. I made a note here that we want to be after the release of next month's information for next year, but
well, and Fred, it's you can't always schedule it because it's the third Thursday of the month. So it's always hard. It's where does the third Thursday fall? It can be anywhere from the 15th to the 21st. So it just lines up on where it is. So.
Very good. Well, seeing no other folks unmuting with questions, we'll go ahead and do a final sign off. Thank you again, Dr. Todey, and invite folks to stay tuned for next month's dairy webinar. We're going to be looking at a bit of a shift. We're going to talk about the difference between cash flow and profitability. So I invite you to participate again next month. Thank you again. I'll go ahead and sign off.
Thanks, Fred.